Hello from Kampala in Uganda. It's great to be here with you today to share some more thoughts from the Bible in this new week. So today I want to take you to the Old Testament in the Bible to share just a couple of verses with you from the book of Habakkuk, chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. This is what it says. Even though the fig trees have no blossoms, and there are no grapes on the vines, even though the olive crop fails, and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. Now, I've always really enjoyed these verses because sometimes life just feels a little bit like that, doesn't it? Maybe with a few less farming related metaphors, but even though the bank account is empty and the work has dried up, even though I'm not sure what my future holds and which way to turn next, even though I'm lonely and there's no one to be with right now, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. They are verses that apply to all of us at some point in our lives. They might apply to you right now. You can fill in the blanks with your own even those for whatever situations or circumstances you may be facing. But I think that there is something just so powerful in rejoicing even though. Even when things are hard, even when it all looks hopeless, even when we're not sure where God is in the situations that we're facing, we can still rejoice. We can still find joy in God in those moments. So the Bible reading plan that I'm working through this year takes me through a little bit of the Old Testament and a little bit of the New Testament on every day. And on the day that I read this verse in Habakkuk, I also read a passage in the book of Acts, which talks about the time that Paul and Silas were arrested after driving a demon out of a slave girl who was making quite a significant profit for her owners by telling the future. In Acts chapter 16, the Bible tells us that this owner wasn't particularly happy with Paul and Silas and that they were severely beaten with wooden rods and then were thrown into prison. And not some kind of a nice prison, but into the inner dungeon, the Bible tells us, to make sure that they couldn't escape. Their feet were secured in the stocks. Well, this story has an amazing end to it. Paul and Silas, they started singing hymns in the midst of the dungeon. The other prisoners were listening. And then an earthquake strikes and the doors just flew open. The chains fell off every single prisoner in that place. And the jailer and his whole family end up becoming Christians and being baptized that very night. An amazing, amazing story. But knowing the ending to it, as we may do, it makes it very, very easy to skim over the part where they found themselves in prison. Can you imagine how much pain they must have been in that moment? They just had a severe beating with wooden rods. And we know that they weren't miraculously healed from the wounds that were caused by that beating, because later the passage talks about the jailer cleaning their wounds. They were in real physical pain. And personally, I think that there must have been a little bit of emotional turmoil there as well, wondering about the future. What's it going to hold? Questioning whether this was the end of their ministry, if it would be the end of their lives. And yet, despite all of that, even though they still rejoiced, they still worshipped, they prayed and they praised through their pain, through their hurt, through their fear, through their uncertainty, through their difficulties, we can always rejoice. Now, Habakkuk, he didn't try and deny that things were hard in that passage that I read earlier. He openly admitted that it was a really difficult time. Rejoicing in God doesn't mean that we need to live in denial about the difficulties we face. It means that we can look at those situations and say, even so, I'm going to rejoice. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. Paul and Silas, they didn't try and pretend that they weren't in prison. I'm pretty sure they didn't look around them and say, how wonderful, what a lovely place this is to spend the rest of our days. What they did was to rejoice anyway. Regardless of the situation they found themselves in, they discovered joy through their pain. So whatever your circumstances today, you can say, even though, I'm going to rejoice. And it may change your situation like Paul and Silas, but it may not. Like Habakkuk, we don't hear anything in the end of that chapter about that situation changing. But either way, rejoicing will change your mindset. As you focus in on the God of your salvation, you'll start to realize his awesome power and majesty again, and know that who he is not diminished by the circumstances you find yourself in. And that regardless of what is happening right now, the best is still to come. Yes, be honest about the situations that you find yourself in. No, you don't have to deny that things are hard. It's okay to admit it. But don't stay in that place of listing your woes. Add on that even though. Yes, this is hard. Even though, I'm going to praise my God. I'm going to rejoice in the God of my salvation, regardless of this situation I find myself in. Thank you so much for joining me here again for these thoughts from the Bible. I'll be back on Friday with some more, so I will see you then.